new season in Knicks basketball, perhaps turning a page after the Knicks hadn't really had anything since the Melo days, and with the Melo days, kind of bittersweet ending there. And then last year, you got a surprise 4 seed, and you think, okay, where's this team going to go? And then they go out in free agency and make the splash with Kemba Walker. Nick, is Kemba, Kemba in Charlotte was a different Kemba than we saw in Boston in terms of the offense was kind of run through Kemba when he was the lone guy in Charlotte, and I think Charlotte's just going to stay that way now that they have LaMelo Ball. But then when he moves to Boston, he becomes kind of a third option behind Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Now in New York, it's seemingly he's perhaps the number 1 option in front of Julius Radle, or sometimes like tonight, Julius is kind of taking the lead, it seems like, and Kemba's playing second fiddle, but a second fiddle that can create something on the offensive side. So this addition of Kemba Walker for the Knicks, you got to be happy as a New York Knicks fan.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing. I don't think there's any downside of the Knicks picking up Kemba. He's a New Yorker. He's back home. I think that's going to be a very tremendous influence on him as far as how hard he wants to play, especially under Tom Thibodeau, because you play for the Knicks and Coach Tibbs, you got to work hard every single day, every second, every minute you're on the court. Again, I think it's really Kemba's a leader for this team now. He's been in the league a while. He's been on some poor teams. He's been on some good teams, and now he's kind of back in that sense of maybe in between. The Knicks are a very talented, aggressive defensive team for sure. But they do have their moments where they lapse and they return to that sort of maybe not as confident and well put together sort of team. And I think that's what Kemba can kind of fill for them. He's a scorer for sure. He's not the same that he was in Charlotte by any means, but he doesn't need to be because he has to just have his nights. He could have a night where he goes for 30 and Julius could have 20, or it could be vice versa. Or maybe they both have 20 and RJ Barrett has 20, or Fournier has 20. There are options for the Knicks now. The playoffs, the number 1 problem that the Knicks needed to fix was the fact that they couldn't score the ball. Julius Radle shot terribly, would get double-teamed. The only real offense was Derrick Rose isoing, which 32-year-old Derrick Rose, that can't be your only option. I'm sorry. As I know you love him, I love him too. As much as he can do, it won't be enough. So that's really where I was excited with Kemba coming in, because he's now that extra option. He jumps into the starting spot. He gives D Rose a little bit more of a rest, and can teach, especially too. He teaches the young guys. Miles McBride, Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes, the guards who are looking still to improve on their game, grow, and find a spot in this league. So Kemba as a leader, I think, is almost more important than potentially the number 1 guy aspect, because that guy, and I want to say, is still Julius Radle, simply because what he did for the Knicks last year, bringing them to a 4 seed, leading them there. But Kemba now as a second guy to take some load off scoring and veteran leadership-wise, I think is tremendously important.
Yeah, and I think the leadership is probably the biggest part that this team not necessarily lacks, but definitely needed some improvement on. Just because, Randall being the only all-star on this team, you've got D Rose, who was an MVP a year ago, and, you kind of had a really young core that, even though they had veterans on their team, they weren't really veterans in the same way you consider a guy who's been there, done that. You had guys who had definitely had experience playing in NBA basketball, but had never really amounted to as much as you'd hope they would amount to if they're going to be classified as veterans. You get Kemba added in, who, all things considered in Charlotte, I'd still say that adds a veteran presence just because he knows what it's like to be the young guy who everyone's looking to for an answer, and he can give you that mentorship there. But then moving over to Boston, that's a winning culture in Boston, and it always has been, seemingly for since the 80s maybe, but especially under Brad Stevens, he kind of gets that experience firsthand. And I think, playing behind Brown and Tatum in a way that you're the third option, I mean, he still puts up 19.3 points per game last year, so it's not like he's walking out there and collecting his easy 6 and then going to hit the showers. He's still putting up points, but I think him being the third option on that team, more or less, allows him this freedom to come into this Knicks offense where he doesn't put the pressure on himself that maybe he put himself on in Charlotte or maybe put on himself in the playoffs last year for the Celtics. He comes into the Knicks with the freedom to kind of create what he wants to create and get the guys around him more involved so that when it's his turn to take a big jumper, it's not, okay, I've dropped 50, I need to get to 52 to win this game. It's, I'm sitting at 18 right now. If I can drop a 20-piece and give us the win, that's great, and that's all I kind of want to do. But we talked about Julius Radle and how he was an all-star last year and perhaps the limiting factor of him as a power forward, just because he's not going to dominate every possession in the same way you'd expect a point guard or a shooting guard to. He's not going to take the ball up and, run ISO and create shots off the dribble that you want him to, or at least, if he's going to, it's going to be in the post. But I still think Julius Randle right now is the number one option for this team until Kemba gets integrated. I don't know how long that's going to be. I kind of draw the line at Christmas Day to when the Knicks can expect Kemba to kind of be running the offense through him. But tonight we see it, especially with his 22, that Julius Randle's still the guy for the Knicks, for at least the near future.
I think, personally, I want that to be this way. I want Julius Randle to remain the number one guy. I don't think Kemba has to be his Charlotte self for the Knicks to be successful. In Charlotte, okay, yeah, that Kemba Walker is probably the best player on the Knicks. But you said Julius Randle may not be the guy to ISO, take the ball up. I don't need him to take the ball up, but when he ISOs, it's either extremely pretty or in the playoffs it would be ugly. But he's shown the capability to do that. I also love him as a playmaker. He had many triple-doubles last year. He had just a lot of just great stat lines in their wins. And you could really tell, if Julius plays well, the team plays well, and they usually win by the record last year, of course. So, you said Christmas Day with Kemba. I don't even know if I'd give it that much time necessarily. I want to see, at least he should be comfortable. At least he doesn't necessarily have to score 20, score 30, 40, whatever you say. Like exactly what you said. Let me hit this shot to end a quarter. We just gave up an 8-0 run. Let me hit a 3 or draw a foul, something to slow the game down. Get the guys back together, regroup, and play, because that should be his really number one job and goal now. A leader. I think Julius is that, but Julius also has to have the burden of being the number one guy at all times. That was where it was hard for, I think, Julius Randle to kind of do it all in the playoffs. There was a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure being the guy in New York. And Randle is not necessarily the name you would expect. They had Carmelo Anthony, Patrick Ewing, in the 70s, Clyde Frazier, Willis Reed, those really big superstar names. Randle is a star. I wouldn't say he's a superstar. Could he get there? Maybe. But there's a long way to go, right? And I think the more he can kind of hone in on his craft and the leadership role can kind of take a backseat really on the court, show that, where then Kemba can fill that role. Or even, I think the wild card for the Knicks, or maybe the X factor, which we haven't really mentioned once yet, is Evan Fournier. Because he's a prolific scorer, prolific shooter, and that is, again, another thing the Knicks needed. If they had, I think that's the real question that the Knicks asked themselves when they picked up these two former Celtics. If we pick up Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, that's scoring. Okay, could we have beaten the Hawks? Or could we have, if we beat them, could we have beaten the Sixers? There's those questions of what exactly was the problem, and they knew they couldn't score the ball. So they got those two guys to score the ball. The question is, what else will they do? And that's where I'm curious with Fournier. What do you think? Because he's really just a scorer in many levels. For many teams that, he was on the Magic for a while, and that's not a team with necessarily a veteran culture, a winning culture, like you said. Maybe, D Rose and Taj Gibson bring a little something different with playoff experience. Fournier really has, I think, 1 or 2 years of that at most, and he's a scorer. So I want to see what else is he going to bring to the table besides just shooting the basketball.
Well, I think something he's going to bring, especially, we're looking at the stats right now. RJ Barrett is still without a bucket tonight, and I think for Knicks fans and, perhaps Tibbs wants RJ to become a consistent contributor for this offense, solely because last year you saw those flashes that really made you say, okay, RJ is the RJ we saw at Duke, and, he has the potential to be up there with, the young guys in this league as someone who's going to stick around and contend with championships. But as good as RJ was last year, there were the games where he was really, really hard to watch. So I think when you add Fournier, it's so that the pressure isn't solely on RJ Barrett, because RJ Barrett is a good shooter and he's a good scorer, but he's a very streaky and inconsistent scorer, at least right now, and especially last season. So I think with the addition of Fournier, it's not so much that veteran leadership that you kind of want with Kemba Walker, excuse me.
Skywalker.
Yeah, right. Christopher Walken voice. But it's more of that taking the pressure off of RJ to not have to, go 7 for 9 from 3, because you've got another guy who's equal to it and will be more than happy to share some of that burden and put up points. He's currently sitting at 11 with Randle now at 24. So I think Fournier in the mix here definitely makes sense. Will he become the number 2 guy, the number 3 guy as the season goes on? You don't know, but you definitely like him in that kind of, I want to say, almost like a PJ Tucker role, where he's going to put up 18 points a game if he's hot. If not, he's still going to give you a quality 12 to 11. And I think that's kind of where you draw the line with him. If he can give you more, obviously you're not going to complain, but he's one of those guys that you can expect consistent production out of, and I think that's where the Knicks have been lacking this past year. And even with the 4th seed, I think you just lacked consistent production out of guys without the last name of Randle.
So I think that PJ Tucker comparison at this moment, and this is you are leading me into my next point anyway, I think is way off because he's a much better scorer than Tucker. But what I want to see from him is I think PJ Tucker would be a perfect Knick. Or a guy like Trevor Ariza, those grit and grind vets.
I should have gone with Ariza
right?
instead of Tucker, just in terms of scoring.
But the thing that I want to see with Kemba and with Fournier is they are not known for their defense, which is fine. Not everyone is, obviously players have different strengths and weaknesses, and that's why they have certain roles on a team. I need to see, not want, and I think it will happen because of Tom Thibodeau. I need to see the exact same Knicks defense and Knicks intensity from those two guys that I saw from everyone else on the Knicks last season, because that was what won them games, especially when their offense wasn't going. So if they can play defense really hard, really Knicks like that grit and grind basketball, and score, I know it's a lot to ask for, but it's really the playing hard aspect of it, because I said Jaylen Brown had 22 points at half. I think it was 22. I said, maybe Fournier was guarding him, because he's not a great defender. So I want to see a little improvement there because the shooting will be there. Yeah, he'll miss probably. It happens. You get streaky or whatever. But I need to see a little bit of defensive improvement simply for the fact that they're playing under Tom Thibodeau and for the New York Knicks.